The air on February 19, 1945, was thick with the acrid stench of cordite and pulverized volcanic ash. It was a smell that would forever be seared into the memories of the Marines of the V Amphibious Corps, a scent they would carry long after they left the bloody shores of Iwo Jima. For them, this was not just another island assault. It was an entry into a nightmare, a landscape sculpted by hell itself. The island, a desolate 8-square-mile spit of black rock, was less a place and more a fortress. Its strategic importance lay in its 2 airfields, which, if captured, could serve as a vital staging point for B-29 bombers on their long-range raids against the Japanese home islands. But the Japanese, under the command of Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, understood this just as well. They had spent months, even years, turning Iwo Jima into an impregnable maze of subterranean defenses. It was a fortress built not on the surface but burrowed deep within the volcanic rock, a labyrinth of interconnected tunnels, caves, and pillboxes that made traditional warfare obsolete. The initial landing was a deceptive display of power. The largest naval bombardment of the Pacific War had preceded the assault, a relentless pounding of the island's surface that had turned the landscape into a pock-marked wasteland. The Marines, a total of over 70,000 men, stormed ashore with a confidence born of overwhelming firepower. They expected a quick, bloody fight against a dazed and demoralized enemy. What they found instead was a death trap. The black sand, a mixture of fine volcanic ash and coarse grains, was a unique kind of hell. It offered no traction, making every step a monumental effort, and it swallowed jeeps, tanks, and landing craft whole. The men, weighed down by their gear, struggled to advance, their boots sinking with every step. But the most terrifying revelation was the eerie silence. The expected heavy machine gun fire was absent. The Japanese, Kuribayashi's design, were not fighting on the beaches. They were waiting. They had allowed the Marines to land, to bunch up on the narrow beaches, to commit their forces to the ash, and then, from hidden positions in the high ground, of Mount Suribachi and the tiered plateaus to the north, they unleashed a storm of fire. The sheer scale of the Japanese defenses was a complete shock. The Marines, who had grown accustomed to fighting a linear battle against a visible enemy, were now faced with a ghost. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere at once. A machine gun would open fire from a seemingly harmless pile of rocks, only to fall silent after a brief period, its crew having retreated into a concealed tunnel. A pillbox, thought to be destroyed by naval gunfire, would suddenly roar to life. The Japanese defenses were not isolated points, but a vast, interconnected network. As one Marine officer later described it, it was like fighting an octopus. You cut off one tentacle, and 2 more would appear from somewhere else. The Marines quickly learned that conventional methods were useless. A direct frontal assault on a cave entrance was suicide, as it would be met by a hail of fire. Throwing grenades into a pillbox was often pointless, as the blast would simply be absorbed by the winding tunnel system. The enemy was untouchable, a silent, unseen force that was slowly but surely bleeding the Marines dry. It was in this brutal reality that the flamethrower, a weapon once seen as an unwieldy and often unreliable tool, found its terrifying purpose. The Marines, under pressure to find a solution to the cave and tunnel networks, turned to the M2 flamethrower. This was not the first time flamethrowers had been used in the Pacific, but at Iwo Jima, their role transcended that of a supplementary weapon. It became the primary tool for survival, the only reliable way to clear the Japanese from their subterranean strongholds. The M2 was a heavy, cumbersome beast. It consisted of 2 tanks, one for the fuel and one for the compressed nitrogen propellant, connected to a long hose and a nozzle. It weighed over 70 pounds when full, a significant burden for a Marine already struggling through the volcanic ash. Its range was limited to about 30 to 40 yards, meaning the operator had to be dangerously close to the enemy to be effective. The operator, a flamethrower man, was a walking target, a visible symbol of a new kind of warfare that struck fear into the hearts of both sides. The job of a flamethrower team was a horrifying blend of courage and desperation. A typical assault on a pillbox or cave would involve a small team. First, a rifleman or BAR, Browning automatic rifleman, would lay down suppressive fire to keep the enemy's heads down. Then, a Marine with a satchel charge, a bag of high explosives, would try to get close enough to destroy the entrance. But this was often impossible. The Japanese had expertly placed their defenses to cover every approach. This is where the flamethrower man came in. Under the cover of a smoke grenade, he would advance, his silhouette an unmistakable sign of the coming firestorm. He was often accompanied by a partner, a flamethrower man's assistant, who carried extra ammunition and provided cover with a carbine or rifle. The most common tactic was to approach the cave entrance, and with a terrifying whoosh, unleash a torrent of jellied gasoline, a mixture of gasoline and a gelling agent that clung to surfaces and burned with an intensity that could reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The dragon's breath, as they called it, would sear everything in its path, consuming oxygen and turning the subterranean tunnels into an inferno. The psychological impact was immense. The Japanese, who had proven their resolve in the face of machine guns and mortars, had no defense against the all-consuming fire. The flamethrower became a symbol of the desperate and brutal nature of the fighting. For every successful use, there were countless moments of pure terror. The flamethrower man was a prized target for Japanese snipers, who understood that taking out the man with the fire could save their own lives and their comrades. The flamethrowers' tanks were also a potential liability, a rumor, though never officially confirmed, that a direct hit could cause a catastrophic explosion. This fear, whether true or not, added another layer of psychological pressure to the already impossible job. The Marines, a brotherhood forged in fire, would often volunteer for these incredibly dangerous missions, not out of a desire for glory, but out of a desperate need to find a way to end the nightmare. They were fighting a war of attrition, one cave, one pillbox, 1 yard at a time. The flamethrower, a tool of absolute terror, became their most effective weapon against an enemy that had chosen to fight from the shadows. The island, once a symbol of strategic necessity, became a canvas for the brutal elemental struggle between man and fire. The first part of the Iwo Jima story was not about grand strategy or sweeping victories, but about the slow, agonizing realization that to win this war, they would have to face a new kind of enemy, and they would have to fight fire with fire. The battle for Iwo Jima was a grueling slog, a methodical and relentless campaign of extermination that played out across the island's scarred landscape. After the initial landings and the grim realization of the Japanese defensive strategy, the Marines settled into a brutal rhythm. It was a war of inches, a campaign defined not by sweeping advances, but by the painstaking, terrifying process of clearing one fortified position after another. The flamethrower, which had emerged as the essential tool in Part 1, now became the centerpiece of this gruesome work. The Marines developed a refined, albeit deadly tactic known as blowtorch and corkscrew. The blowtorch was the flamethrower, used to flush out or incinerate the defenders within a cave or pillbox. The corkscrew was the satchel charge, used to seal the entrance, ensuring that any surviving Japanese soldiers couldn't re-emerge to fight again. It was a simple, elegant, and horrifyingly effective strategy. The men who wielded the flamethrowers were a special breed. They were not just soldiers, they were artisans of destruction, their craft honed by the sheer necessity of survival. A flamethrower team would typically consist of a gunner, his assistant, and a couple of riflemen for close-in protection. They would move with a deliberate slowness, a grim procession across the battlefield, their eyes scanning for the telltale signs of a hidden entrance. A small depression in the ground, a pile of rocks that seemed out of place, a barely discernible opening in the side of a ridge. When they located a target, the real terror began. The gunner, burdened by the heavy tanks on his back, would inch forward, his movements betraying a mixture of courage and profound fear. He was a beacon, a target, for every sniper and machine gunner on the battlefield. His comrades would lay down a barrage of suppressive fire, bullets sparking against the volcanic rock, hoping to give him the precious seconds he needed to get within range. The moment of truth came when he finally pressed the trigger. A thunderous roar would erupt from the nozzle, followed by a thick, fiery stream of napalm that arced through the air like a dragon's breath. The aftermath of a flamethrower attack was absolute. The heat inside the enclosed spaces was unimaginable, capable of superheating the air and causing instant combustion. The jellied gasoline clung to every surface, burning for minutes with a furious intensity. The fire consumed all the oxygen, leading to asphyxiation for those who were not burned alive. The psychological impact on the Japanese defenders, who were trained to fight to the death, was devastating. For the first time, they were faced with a weapon that rendered their defenses, their caves, and their tunnels utterly useless. The flamethrower turned their subterranean strongholds, which were meant to be their sanctuaries, into crematoria. The sound of a flamethrower igniting was a sound of finality, a harbinger of a terrible end. This, more than any other weapon, broke the Japanese will to fight from their hidden positions. They were forced to either emerge and face the Marines directly, a death they preferred, or be consumed by the fire. The battle for Iwo Jima was not just a story of flamethrowers. It was a story of unrelenting courage and unimaginable sacrifice. The Marines, with their flamethrowers, were slowly but surely carving a path to victory, but the cost was staggering. The casualty rates for flamethrower teams were disproportionately high. The men who carried the fire were often the first to be killed or wounded. The Marines, a close-knit brotherhood, would often mourn the loss of their flamethrower man, knowing that his death meant another would have to step up and take his place. This was a war where the lives of men were measured in yards gained and pillboxes cleared. The battle raged for 36 days, a testament to the unyielding resolve of both sides. By the end, over 6,800 American Marines were killed and another 19,000 wounded. The Japanese suffered an even greater catastrophe, with an estimated 21,000 men killed and only a few hundred captured. The long-term impact of the flamethrowers' use at Iwo Jima was profound and lasting. It cemented the weapon's place in modern warfare, especially in close-quarters combat and urban environments. It proved that in the face of deeply entrenched and fortified positions, traditional methods were often insufficient. The flamethrower, with its ability to project fire into a concealed space, provided a solution. The lessons learned at Iwo Jima would be applied in subsequent conflicts, including the Vietnam War, where flamethrowers were used to clear dense jungle foliage and tunnels. But the legacy of the flamethrower on Iwo Jima wasn't just about tactics and technology, it was about the men who used it. The experience of those who wielded the dragon's breath left an indelible mark on their psyche. The memory of the sounds, the smells, and the raw, unblinking terror of their job would haunt them for the rest of their lives. For many, the horrors of that war were not just in the battles fought, but in the quiet moments of reflection, where they had to come to terms with the terrible responsibility of their actions. Iwo Jima became a symbol of the brutal reality of the Pacific War, and the flamethrower became its emblem. It was a weapon of last resort, a tool of absolute destruction that was necessary to secure a victory that, while costly, was undeniably crucial. The capture of the island provided a vital forward base for the B-29s, shortening their journeys and allowing for a more effective bombing campaign against Japan. It also provided an emergency landing site for hundreds of damaged bombers, saving the lives of countless airmen. The iconic photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi, a moment of triumph amidst the carnage, stands as a powerful testament to the sacrifice of the Marines. But the real story of Iwo Jima lies not just in that moment of victory, but in the trenches and the caves, in the bitter struggle of man against fire and rock. It is a story of a battle so intense, so brutal, that it forced the invention of a new kind of warfare, one where a terrifying weapon of immense psychological power became the key to survival. The legacy of the flamethrower at Iwo Jima is not one of glory, but a somber reflection on the lengths to which men were willing to go to fight a war and the heavy price they paid for victory.